Morning, great morning, great morning. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Tanya. And as always, thank you to our team, to our readers, and to each and every one of you for being here with us this wonderful morning. I pray that you are enjoying this coolness in the weather and just know that, well, it's supposed to rain later on, and that's just God's liquid sunshine that comes to cleanse, to cleanse. So enjoy, enjoy. Well, our lesson this morning is entitled Transcending Limitations, but I want to recap last week just for a moment or two. Last week we talked about journeying through life and this journey being a sacred journey. We said that the journey serves as an exploration of where we experience spiritual growth and development, breakthroughs, enlightenment, and many, many times, many, many opportunities of self reflection, and also serves to draw us deeper in relationship with our God self. We suggested that it's great to travel lightly and leave behind, not take with us all of the experiences that we've had that maybe we didn't think were so good, all of the characteristics about ourselves that we just want to release. Travel lightly because God is the supply and the supplier, and all provisions are provided for and revealed in divine timing. So, when we go on a trip and we pack this and we pack that and we pack just in case, and I might need, no, when we're traveling through this journey of life, we need to travel lightly because God is the supply and the supplier, and everything that's necessary along the way will be provided for and revealed in divine timing. My friends, there's one truth that I know for certain. There's one truth, there are many truths, but there's one truth that I just know for certain. And that one truth is that I will always know, as the song says, I will always know what I need to know when I need to know it. Isn't that something? I'm in my personal life, I'm not a big fan, a huge fan of social media. I'm not all over social media because I really focus in on this truth that I'm going to know whatever it is I need to know when I need to know it. And my first experience of that was many years ago, maybe 25, 30 years ago, when I was sitting in the office of a not-for-profit agency that I was working with part-time, and the phone rang. I was only one in that office that day. I came in to do some things and the phone rang and I picked up the phone, and on the other end of the phone was General Motors. And General Motors was saying they never identified themselves who was speaking. They didn't ask who they wanted to speak to. They just simply said they wanted to know when to come to pick up the car. And I was asking what car, and they described the car. But I knew this car. I knew this car, and I knew the person in the office who drove this car. And they wanted to come pick up the car because the car was leased in the agency's name. But this particular person who drove this car used this car personally. They took long trips in this car. They took this car home every night. And I always know what I need to know when I need to know it. And that experience caused me to zero in on that. And time and time and time and time and time again in my life, that has been my experience. That I always know, and you will always know what you need to know when you need to know it, in accordance with our closeness and our relationship with God. So when we travel through this journey of life, we travel lightly. We travel with optimism, with positive expectations. We travel in humility, and we travel in trust in God. Remembering that the consciousness that we travel with, whatever we pack in the suitcase of our heart and our mind, the consciousness that we travel with impacts the course of the journey. You may remember last week the words of the cashier in the story, the woman who entered the store and was a little bit frazzled and began the conversation with the cashier about how things are now and how they've changed and this and that and the other. And the cashier finally said to her, things are easier now. Things will be getting easier now, unless there's something you're holding on to. Unless there's something you're holding on to. You may also remember the story of in Jeremiah 2 of the man with the measuring stick. And he wanted to measure the length and the width of Jerusalem because was going to organize people to build walls around Jerusalem. And God said to the prophet Jeremiah, Jerusalem will be a city without walls. Jerusalem metaphysically meaning a place of peace. That place of peace within us is a place without walls, without limitations, without barriers, without borders. And so today, as we travel through life's journey, we're looking at transcending limitation, transcending barriers and borders that we may have built around our life from our thinking, from our feeling, from our experiences. And if you remember the musical selections today, rise. We're calling on spirit to rise up within us so that we can experience a higher place, as the other musical selections said. We can experience a higher place in consciousness. And when we're living from a higher place in consciousness, it's a different kind of living. It's a living more peaceful, more trusting, more humble, and more prosperous in love, in wisdom, in friendships, all around holistic prosperity. So, the truth of the matter is, in God, there are no limitations. We know that as true students, or we say that as true students. In God, there are no limitations. However, in our humanness, at times we may mentally and or emotionally experience what we have come to name limitations. We may hear something sometimes that may upset us. Someone may say something to us that upsets us, and we perceive it from our own point of view, when in reality, what was said or what we assumed was implied, or what we thought we heard is really the rubbing or the touching or the reopening of an unhealed wound. When someone says something and it upsets us and it annoys us, and each time this happens, we move through the same emotional experience, it's really the rubbing or the touching or the reopening of an unhealed wound. And that unhealed wound is the limitation. That unhealed wound is the barrier that causes us not to move on where we want to be. I'll share an experience that I had with me just this week. I was driving down a street and I noticed a store. It was an AT&T store. A good feeling rose up within me. It was a good feeling that rose up within me. And it rose up because of the perception that I had of what I thought I saw. The sign on the store said AT&T Wireless Center. I read in my mind and caused this good feeling to rise up within me that it said AT&T Wellness Center. And I said, oh, they're into wellness now. But can you see how perception, how we someone says something and we hear it differently, we see it differently, we think of it differently, and it just wells up within us. It just opens up wounds that might have been there, or feelings that might have been there, or good feelings, not so good feelings, whatever they may be. But there are no limitations in God. There are no limitations in God. There is no wounding in God. That is of our humanness. So it's the unhealed aspects of our soul's experiences that help to support and sustain what we have come to call limitations and barriers. You know, if we would be trying to get back to what we call normal, recreating what we once lived in the past, the barriers and the limitations of pain and doubt and unforgiveness and desperation and all of that, it won't allow us to attract to ourselves what it is we're really seeking, what it is we really want, that Jerusalem that we want to experience, that place of peace. If we were desperately trying to get back to, if we were anxious to get back to what we have named and called normal, that those barriers within us would not allow us to get us there. We have to transform. We have to transcend those limitations. We have to make a change within our thoughts, within our feelings in order to get there. So instead, it's not the pain that causes the challenge. It's the lessons learned through the pain, the lessons learned through the doubt, the lessons learned through the unforgiveness that causes us to grow in understanding and to evolve in consciousness. It's the lessons that are learned in the experiences and in the situations and in the circumstances that allow us to grow and move on and transcend and evolve in consciousness. Think about this. Learning lessons requires that we let go of old beliefs and feelings. If they didn't require us to let go, if lessons did not require us to let go of old beliefs and feelings, think about this, they wouldn't be lessons. It would be information or knowledge we already have and know. Let me give you an example. Let us look at a child who's learning to tie his or her shoes. After trying and practicing and trying and practicing, the child becomes aware of which string goes in which direction to tie the shoe, which string overlaps which string to make this happen. The lesson is learned through the process of the practice. If it were not a lesson, the child would have already known how to tie the shoe. Lessons require that we first let go of old beliefs and feelings. If they did not require that we release that old thinking and feeling, they would not be lessons. We can look at the prodigal son and the lesson that was learned. We can look at the story of Job and see the lesson that was learned. You see, it's when we work through whatever the limitation is, when we work through whatever the barrier is, maybe the anguish, the frustration, the feelings that we're experiencing, that's when the eyes are opened and the mind is illumined and the heart feels the peace. Now, there are times when the thing that we really don't want to do, the person who we don't want to contact for whatever reason, the place that we don't want to go, the behavior pattern that we don't want to change, let go of, or release, that's the breakthrough. That's the knowing at the door, knocking at the door of our heart. The thing that we don't want to do, the very thing we don't want to do, the person that we just don't want to be in contact with, the place that we don't want to go and we keep hesitating, we keep procrastinating. We don't want to go there. We don't want to talk to them. We don't want to do this. We don't want to change that. That's the very thing that can cause the breakthrough. The very thing that can remove the limitation or the barrier so that we can transcend to a higher point of living. You know, sometimes let's look at a person who has a consistency of lateness, late for appointments, late for work, late for meetings. There is there in that soul a resistance towards orderliness, regardless of how it may be rationalized. The challenge is orderliness. That's the resistance. We tell ourselves all kinds of stories about not being on time. The teacher's not going to be there, so the class won't start on time. So I'm going to go a little later. The doctor always runs behind in his or her scheduling. So I'm going to go a little later. The meeting's not going to begin on time. So I'm going to go a little later. We tell ourselves all of these things. We just rationalize all of these ideas. When the bottom line to it is a resistance. There is a resistance, a rationalization to orderliness. And that rationalization blocks the breakthrough. It serves as a barrier if we were just to change our thinking and change our thoughts about being there. Because at that point, in this instance, in this situation, the challenge is just to get there and to take advantage of the time of being there, of just sitting and centering ourselves instead of focusing on the other person's not there, so they're going to be late, so I'm going to be late, as opposed to getting there and seeing the opportunity of being there and having the opportunity of sitting and quieting self and maybe reading or praying or meditating. Oh, we have these limitations that we place on ourselves, my friends, and we can make our life easier and better when we lift these, when we change these, when we remove these, when we dissolve these, when we transcend these. And sometimes, oftentimes, we don't even realize these limitations that we've placed on ourselves. It calls for self evaluation, self reflection, and going within and sitting still and just being quiet and allowing spirit to speak. The very thing that we put up resistance to is the breakthrough. Transcending requires working through and doing. You see, the doing, the doing of it, of transcending, is the invitation and the opportunity to tap into the greater awareness. It's the doing of it, the activity of it, that allows us to tap into the aha. And once we arrive at the aha moment of something, we're not going back to what we used to be or what we used to call normal. Those of us who can remember Fred Sanford, I'll say this. Fred Sanford said that when you are accustomed to top shelf, you don't go back to Ripple. When you're accustomed to a higher point of view, you don't go back to what you used to be and what you used to know and what you used to do and what you used to call normal. And how any challenge may affect a person. And we know that one challenge can affect everyone in a different way. But how a challenge affects ourselves depends on, hear this, our understanding. It depends on our state of mind. It depends on our previous experiences. And it depends on, most importantly, our perception of God and how we relate to the God that we know. How we move through challenges, how we transcend limitations or barriers, how we overcome challenges is totally dependent, first of all, on our perception of God, how we see God, how we know God, what we know about God, and how we relate to the God that we know. And so one of the keys in overcoming is to release and let go, to identify that, to try to identify that and work at identifying that and asking the Christ within to reveal to us and identify to us what it is we need to let go of, what it is we need to release, and to recognize why we're holding on. Why are we holding on and not letting go? Is it out of fear? Is it out of anger? Is it out of frustration? Why are we holding on? Release it and let it go. Have you ever walked into a room and forgot why you were there? Forgot what it is you came into that room to get or to pick up or to retrieve? Sometimes if you stay there for a moment, just stand there or sit there for a moment, the thought comes back of why I'm here. But when the thought doesn't come back, move on. Move on. Why? Because the thought will eventually come back. Have you ever thought and had these thoughts that just came to your mind, and it just seemed that as quickly as they came, it's just as quickly as they left? But you know what? You'll always know what you need to know when you need to know it. You see, when Spirit gives us an idea to get up, go into another room, pick up an item, and come back, and we do that, and in the process of moving from one room to another, a gazillion thoughts are going through the mind, and by the time we get to that room, we forgot why we're there. But that thought of why we're there and what we came here to do will come back. So we don't have to stand there and tug and push and beat up on ourselves. Move on. The thought will come back. What we need to know will always come to us in divine right timing. Move on. Transcend the barrier. Move on to the next project, the next event, the next activity. The thought will return. What I've tried to do in my life is write down what I need to remember. Write down what I need to remember. And then I'll chuckle at this. You have to remember to look at what you wrote. Isn't that right? But it helps. So you have to find little ways to help you to stay on track, to stay focused, so that we can transcend. Because in this busy world and in this time that we're in now, it is easy to forget what we should be doing, what we should be focused on, where we should be headed, how we should be feeling and thinking. It is easy to go back to what we call normal. It is easy to become stuck on an idea, stuck on a feeling, stuck in a project. It is easy to take that space. So we constantly have to stay in meditation, stay in prayer, constantly asking ourselves and observing and finding ways to move around these barriers, to become clear, and the idea returns. You know, that's a form of God's love. That returning of ideas is a form of God's love. Scripture says, I will never leave you or forsake you. When we go into that room and we forget why we're there and we come back and later on that idea comes to us, that is a form of love. That is a form of, I will never leave you or forsake you. I will always be with you. Yes, that is a form of love. And we need to see it as a form of love. Let it go. It comes back. One of our scriptures this morning reminded us that yet, even in the midst of all these things, we triumph over them. For God has made us more than conquerors. And God's demonstrated love is our glorious victory over everything. God's demonstrated love is our glorious victory over everything. So we need to be traveling on this journey as we're transcending and living our life on purpose rather than just rolling from one day to the next. Living our life on purpose, knowing what our purpose is, why we came, what it is we came here, what it is each of us specifically came here to do, and living that. That's living on purpose. Studies show that people who live with a purpose and people who live on purpose recover faster from surgeries and procedures. They suffer less from depression and anxiety, the studies show, and they work more vigorously, and they overcome and transcend with greater resilience. Why is that? Because living on purpose is living from a God energy within us. It's not living from just tasks that we have to do, or we have to get this done, and we have to go grocery shopping, we have to do the laundry, we have to fix this around the house, we have to do that. When we're living from a purpose, we're on track. We're on God's track. We're on the track that God placed us here to be on. And so there's always a desire to be involved in that and get that done. There's always a happiness and an excitement about being in that space and in that place. People who live on purpose and people who live with a purpose overcome and transcend with greater resilience, with more flexibility because the thinking is more fluid, not as easily stuck because they are purpose driven. So living with a purpose requires three things: connection, direction, and action. Connection, first of all, with God, connection with people, connection with causes, connection with activities, situations, positive situations and events that are valuable and meaningful to us. So if we don't have the connection right now with people, for instance, that we used to have a year and some months ago, how do we shift that? Do we just sit down and moan and groan and say, I haven't seen so and so in a year and a half? Or do we find other ways to create that connection? At this point, maybe creating that correct connection with that particular person might be seeing them in the park, seeing them outside, creating other ways and not being stuck. First is the connection with God, the connection with people, and the connection with causes. People who are working for a cause are happier people. People who are working for a cause, who are living for a cause, who are living on a cause, are living on purpose, and they are more resilient. They bounce back easier. So living with a purpose also requires direction, that we must point ourselves towards what it is we're being called to do, knowing what it is we're being called to do, and pointing ourselves and our actions in that direction. Movement towards what is valuable and what we believe is important to us. Connection, direction, and action. Living on purpose so that we are more resilient at transcending obstacles, transcending what we call limitations, transcending barriers, and still knowing that spiritually speaking, in God, there are no limitations. We create these limitations by our thinking and by our feeling. It is also shown in studies that those who are more connected to causes and to God live a more stable life. Think about that. Connections first to God. And we don't have to go anywhere out of our room, out of our apartment, out of our house, out of our anything to be more connected with God. We just have to sit down and make that connection through prayer and meditation. Those who are more connected live a more meaningful life and a more stabilized life because truth stabilizes us. Truth grounds us. Truth principles ground us in life. And we don't get as frazzled and as dazzled and as off center when we are grounded in truth. We're more stabilized. The more direction we have in life, in working towards our purpose, in journeying towards our purpose, in journeying in our purpose, the more direction we have, the less we find ourselves ending up in places where we don't want to be. So maybe the spiritual direction was to the left, and we veered off to the right. The more grounded we are, the more spiritual direction we are following, we don't end up in places where we don't want to be. And the more right action we take, the more progress we make. The more right action we take, the more progress we make. So what determines right action? Right action is sitting still and asking Christ within, what is mine to do? And then do it. That's the right action. It sounds simple. It can be done. It has been done, and it continues to be done. Living in divine purpose, transcending those barriers and those limitations, responding to Spirit's call, connection, direction, and action. The scripture in Psalms 121, 1 and 2, the psalmist writes, I lift my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven. I lift my vision, my eyesight in consciousness to know where my help comes from. And my help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. So we don't have to be frazzled and dazzled along this journey in life. Whatever is happening is a lesson for us to grab hold to. The pain and the suffering comes when we don't accept the lesson and we stay there in the problem, the issue, the challenge. The goal is to transcend, to rise above. And we do that, we can mostly only do that by going through the challenge. Always knowing that God is with us. I will not forsake you. The love of God is our love. The love of God is always within us through ideas, divine ideas that allow us to transcend. So find the stillness, my friend. Find the stillness within you and around you. For you, that stillness might be a special chair in your living space. It may be a special corner. We don't have to have an entire studio A corner will do. A chair will do. If you want a particular room, that'll do. A spot in the park will do. But find that place that brings you to that stillness so that you can seek and know and transcend and override and overcome to be in the place and the space where you want to be. It is said that, and I remember this as a ministerial student, that what we are seeking in life is the same thing that's seeking us. Because the truth of the matter is, the bottom line to what we're always seeking is God in different forms. We may be hungry and we want to eat. We're seeking God in the form of food. We may want more finances and we're seeking God in the form of money. What we're seeking is seeking us because we're seeking God. And what we're looking with is the same thing as what we're looking for. What we're looking for, God, is the same thing we're looking with. Think about that. What we're looking for is what we're looking with because God is within us. The Christ is within us. So what we're looking for is the same thing that we're using to look with. Think about that. So I want to close here today with sharing with you these thoughts concerning transcending the issues, rising above the issues, rising to a higher place in consciousness and living from a more ease-filled point in life. In our transcending, what we choose transforms us. Who we love remolds us. How we create remakes us. And how we live reshapes us. So in our choosing, we want to be wise. In our loving, we want to be bold. In creating, we want to be courageous. For in spirit, we're already whole. So in our choosing, we want to be wise. In our loving, we want to be bold. In creating, we want to be courageous. Because in spirit, we're already whole. God bless you. I bless you. And so it is. Namaste.